London Broadcasting, the news and information voice of independent radio. Welcome to LBC at 6 o'clock, October the 8th. My name's David Jessel, this is the morning show, and here's the news.
This is Ken Guy with LBC News. The Middle East War. A meeting of the United Nations Security Council has been called in a bid to stop the fighting.
The opening of LBC and the start of independent local radio on October the 8th, 1973. The seeds were sown on March 29th, 1971, with the introduction of a government white paper, an alternative source of broadcasting, which then became the basis of the Sound Broadcasting Bill. The Minister of Posts and Telecommunications at that time was Christopher Chataway.
The government, which would way Radio 1, unless one could find enough frequencies. And lo and behold, within 2 weeks, the BBC had found another 54.
It was also Chataway's idea to have an all-news station as part of the proposed independent radio system.
I went to the United States to have a look at commercial radio. I mean, I thought that I ought to do, to see if there are any ideas. And the one thing that did impress me a lot at the time was were the all-news stations in New York and Washington. And I'd been with ITN for a while in television, and I felt that, one of the strengths of commercial television was ITN. And from that came the idea of LBC and of IRN.
Did you meet much opposition when you aired the idea of an all-news station?
Yes, it wasn't popular with a lot of the people who had campaigned for commercial radio for quite a long time. A number of them had seen the sort of, wanted to have much smaller stations, people starting up wherever they liked, and I don't think they'd envisaged a serious news station with it, and they thought that it would involve some cost, which it does. So, yes, there was quite a lot of opposition.
Well, the bill was passed, and the newly renamed Independent Broadcasting Authority was able to put the first ILR franchises up for offer. The London News and Information contract went to the London Broadcasting Company. Getting a new radio station off the ground wasn't easy, as Keith Belcher, one of the news editors on that very first day, explains.
Well, it was really kind of amazing, because nobody in the country actually knew really how to run a 24-hour speech station. So everything that we did was for the first time. And of course, doing things for the first time, every time you do it the first time, you tend to do it wrong. So in the beginning, we had quite a lot of fun just trying to find out what it was that we were supposed to be doing and how the heck we were going to do it. That was complicated slightly by the fact that they started a war in the Middle East almost to the day, on the day that we went to air. And we also then had to dash around all over the world trying to find the proper correspondents to cover that story for us. It was very, very exciting. And very tiring too, because an awful lot of us were putting in literally 24-hour shifts on the station in those days. It was great fun.
Yes, well, one person who remembers that first morning very well was listener Wallace Gravatt.
Well, I wrote to David Jessel, was presenting the first morning programmes, and little did I think that he sort of mentioned me on the air, and I was very keen, and I sort of was lying in bed there early in the morning, sort of listening to the first programmes, very excited that the LBC was going to hit the air after all the publicity. And lo and behold, they had a quick few seconds recorded messages from the three party leaders, and then David Jessel said, well, we had lots of messages of goodwill and congratulation, and amongst which was one for Wallace Gravatt, Millview Railway in Reigate, where I was living at that time. I had a flu, and I nearly fell out of bed, and it was repeated again an hour later, and quite a few friends over the next day or so said, heard you on the radio, your name mentioned on the radio this morning.
So LBC was on the air. But in those early days, it sounded very different.
The time now is 2 1/4 minutes to 9, which means it's 2 1/4 minutes away from a full news bulletin on LBC. And that just about wraps up the morning show. This has been the morning show. This is David Jessel. Now you know all you need to know about the day, so have a nice one.
Welcome back to 2 in the morning, and a cold, almost chilly, but lovely sunny morning it is here in London.
I thought you were looking rather goose pimply this morning.
Yeah, it was very goose pimply weather all over.
Oh.
Anyway.
If only I had a winter coat.
The time on London Broadcasting is 2:10. Welcome to At Home. My name is Belle Mooney. With me in the studio is Steve Merrick, as he is indeed 5 days a week sitting there loyally while
Don't say it like that.
Gillian Strickland and I swap over and go off shopping, but Steve's here 5 days a week. Well, we've got a good program for you today. We've got a delicious recipe from my own personal private recipe book. That's a Belle Mooney special, like the Scouse recipe I gave you last week, and it's a really good one today. We review a new magazine on your bookstores.
It's 4:30, and this is Carol Barnes with the LBC News.
This is the afternoon show. Hello and welcome. My name is Ty Brosnan, and from now until 7:30, I'll be here on LBC and hope you will be too. This is the show that, as we always say, winds down the day with the news behind the news, people in the news, games, stories, puzzles, traffic, weather, money, and AA reports. And this time, I didn't run out of breath.
And a very good evening to you from me, Phil J. Welcome to London Broadcasting Nightline right the way through till 6 a.m.
One of the original presentation team, now a successful writer and broadcaster, was Nigel Rees.
It was absolutely disastrous at the beginning. I mean, it's now ancient history when he's talking about people who long ago moved away. I was very excited at the prospect of LBC starting, because I thought there was a chance of doing news and current affairs broadcasting in a new way, and I invented this wonderful word, news disc jockey. I said, what you want is a news disc jockey, you know, somebody who could really introduce the news and love history. But that didn't seem to happen. I think the basic problem in the early days was that the station was run by newspaper people who didn't know really what all these newfangled things called microphones were, and we had some terrible problems.
Yes, something borne out by another early presenter, Adrian Love.
I came in here at the suggestion of a friend of mine who had come in on day one as a newsreader, a guy called Paul Ingrams, and I'm not being nasty about our colleagues who are long gone on to other wondrous things, but he phoned me up and said, get down here, son, the place is full of people from Fleet Street who were saying things like, what's that funny black thing? It's a microphone. Oh, is it? Oh, gosh. And he phoned me up and he said, get down here and have a chat. And I did. I came down and met the then powers that be. Things have changed. And they offered me an 8-hour phone-in show without an audition. So I started doing Nightline, the original 10 at night till 6 in the morning, open your eyes with matchsticks job. And it was my first time doing talk radio, and it was fascinating.
Well, as the end of 1973 approached, Britain was in a recession caused by spiralling oil prices as a result of the Middle East War that October. Then, at the beginning of 1974, came the miners' strike and the 3-day week. Prime Minister Edward Heath called an election and lost.
As a country, we face grave problems at home and abroad. Do you want a strong government which has clear authority for the future to take the decisions which will be needed? Do you want Parliament and the elected government to continue to fight strenuously against inflation? Or do you want a government which will abandon the struggle against rising prices under pressure from one particular powerful group of workers? It's time for you to speak with your vote. It's time for your voice to be heard. The voice of the moderate and reasonable people of Britain, the voice of the majority.
The economic situation was certainly not in LBC's favour. Advertising budgets were being cut heavily, and the station's audiences were not of sufficient size to entice advertisers onto the airwaves in the first place. If LBC was to survive, drastic changes had to be made. The responsibility for making those changes lay with the new chief editor, Marshall Stewart, who joined LBC from the BBC, where he'd been editor of Radio 4's Today programme.
The immediate impressions that I had was one of enormous confusion, a good deal of disorganization, but interestingly enough, a very strong sense of enthusiasm and energy and commitment from the start. I think to a certain extent they operated in the way that they knew best, and that for many of them was based on newspaper technology, newspaper styles, and that was one of the fundamentals that had to be changed. So, in a sense, one began from the beginning to try to create a format which would be attractive to the listeners, and which would also accommodate, of course, breaking news and 24 hours of news. It gave suddenly London, and also set style for the UK, the opportunity for news to be broken immediately when it was important, without having to wait, let's say, for
afternoon theatre to complete its run.
Well, one of Marshall's first moves was to change the important early morning programme, and in so doing he managed to persuade former Today presenter Douglas Cameron to join LBC.
I think he was looking round for somebody to try and present the morning programme, and in desperation he thought, well, I worked with this fellow called Cameron on Today, and he wasn't too bad, and he didn't need much money, and he's fairly affable. Why don't I give him a ring? And he said, would you like to come along to LBC? He said, I don't think we can look forward to too much of a future at the moment, but he said, why don't you chance it? And he said, if you get 6 months out of it, well, it's 6 months, isn't it?
The morning is the key area where the reputation for the station could be made, where the greatest impact on the audience, the potential audience, could be made. And you can, with luck and skill and hard work, set the style and the tone for the rest of the day. So the morning has to be the flagship. It appealed to me that, having worked in the BBC, where much store was set by the revolutionary title in the afternoons of the PM show, that one was immediately able, on changing jobs, to rechristen the LBC morning programme AM. That seemed to me to be a perfectly natural, competitive thing to do.
But in those days, Doug's partner on AM was a chap called Alan Mackenzie. My early involvement was as a traffic reporter, giving road reports for the first time on British radio, regularly, from a helicopter. Marshall Stewart again.
It seemed to us, I think, at that stage, that one wanted to give putting Bob Holness in a helicopter and getting him to report on various jams seemed to me to be one which gave us both opportunities at once, and it worked very well.
Well, we're immediately over the A11 now. From Stratford Broadway right back along the A11, there's what must surely be a 2 or 3 mile tailback of traffic. You could do worse than to branch off and go along the A106 through Hackney Wick. That does look as though it's going to build up.
Yes, not the last time in my time here at LBC that I've had the wind up. Well, LBC's sound changed in other ways. New station identification jingles were produced, featuring the distinctive tones of voiceover specialist Tony J, and a new station theme by composer Jeff Wayne.
LBC was trying to project themselves as a news station with a tremendous emphasis on news. News that obviously changes rapidly and regularly. I was trying to construct a piece of music that would almost be like a series of never-ending notes, but built around basically only 3 notes, which also happen to be 3 letters to the station, LBC. I tried to give a feeling of urgency, and something that would hopefully last a period of time through changes of orchestrations and looking at technology as it would be current. And that 10 years ago I was working with on the LBC music anyway, strings and monophonic synthesizers, whereas today I'm working with very complicated computers and all sorts of other state-of-the-art toys that we didn't have 10 years ago.
Every minute of every day, news is happening. A diplomatic breakthrough in the Middle East, a new traffic pattern in Barnet, political intrigue in high places, lunchtime theatre in Islington. Big stories, little stories. They all affect you, and you need to know about them. This is where to find out what's happening in the world, in the country, and down your road. This is LBC, and this is our new sound.
I think with any composition, what I try to do first is to get the right tone, the attitude, and once you get that, then I find that it comes easier, whereas if I struggle for a long time trying to get the tone right, so to speak, then it really is difficult all the way through. I'm probably on the wrong thing to start with.
LBC, where news comes first.
Excuse me?
Yes?
I wonder, could you help me?
I'll certainly try.
Could you tell me what 417 means? As in LBC 417?
Well, of course. That's our wavelength. 417 meters on the medium wave band.
I see, thank you.
Not at all.
I don't have a 417 on my radio, or even a 4.
You probably wouldn't. Most radios these days are marked in kilohertz.
Ah.
Yes, so instead of 417, you dial 719.
719.
Kilohertz.
Kilohertz. Oh, thank you. Is that what they call FM?
Well, no. FM means frequency modulation. That's just another way of saying VHF.
VHF, of course.
And in VHF, LBC is at 97.3 megahertz.
Megahertz, 97.3, I see. Well, thank you very much. Is there anything else I ought to know?
Well, there is the LBC location code we use only in the trade.
What's that?
Find Radio 3 and move up an inch.
Yes, other ideas to improve LBC's image were tried, often successfully, using some very well-known names, such as Michael Parkinson and David Frost.
Best things in current affairs radio, but at the same time to have the same philosophy as a lot of my audience debates have had on television. Either you have first-person stories, you have the real person making the decisions, or you talk to the people. You try and avoid the pundits in between, because the key to it is unpredictability, excitement, not knowing what's going to come next, coping with whatever happens next. You know
David
what I mean?
Frost.
And the same thing happens to
Frost
me.
on Thursday, 10 a.m. on LBC.
He came with a mission to boldly go where no film program had gone before.
Wrong show.
Sorry. He came to bring the film news to the big city, to face up to the men and women behind the film industry, to make Parkinson's Picture Show the definitive film program.
Well, a man's got to do what a man's got to do.
Michael Parkinson on LBC, 9:30 Friday, 3 o'clock Sunday.
And former Prime Minister Edward Heath presented 2 series on his great loves, sailing and music.
Music is all-pervasive. It permeates almost every aspect of our daily lives. Perhaps the extent to which this is so isn't fully recognized, because we still speak of those who are interested in music and those who aren't. For while there are clearly some who are more interested than others, virtually everyone is continually encountering and responding to music in their everyday lives.
The nice thing about that was that they all responded very vigorously. They were all keen to try the opportunities that we were able to present to them. And it seemed to me that with a station located in London, even though its main thread was local news and information, a great deal of national news, of course, from our end to support that there's no better place than London to be able to provide a shop window for so many of the big names in broadcasting who are available to us. And it seemed to me at that stage, why should the BBC and also why should network television have access to the big names? And David Frost, Mike Parkinson, and we mentioned Edward Heath to complete that trio, were all enormously responsive to the opportunities we gave them. And I think all of them would say still that they were struck by the enormous enthusiasm of the people who worked with them here, because there was, and I suspect still is, a much greater contact between all of the people who make the programmes and the personalities who can take part in programmes from time to time, and the audience. And I think that's the crucial linkage between all of those various ingredients. The audience is very much part of the end product of this station.
When LBC first came on the air, it had to be allocated that temporary wavelength of 417 metres. The IBA had not yet received final planning permission for a permanent transmitter site. Those early signals came from an aerial slung between the 2 chimneys of Lots Road Power Station in Fulham, which became affectionately known as Radio Clothesline. In the spring of 1975, the new transmitter site at Saffron Green near Barnet was ready, and LBC changed to the now familiar 261 metres.
Hello?
Yes?
Remember me? You explained LBC to me. You remember all the kilohertzes and things.
Oh, yes.
I understand it all now. 417 meters, 719 kilohertz, 97.3 megahertz. You were so helpful.
Yes, well, that's all changed, of course.
Changed.
Yes, those were only temporary frequencies. LBC is now at 261 meters medium wave.
261.
That's right, and on some radios we'll be at 1151 kilohertz.
1151, I see. Damn. What about FM 97.3 VHF? Where are you putting that?
VHF stays the same.
Oh, well, that's good, isn't it?
Super.
I'll just have to learn it all again. 261, 1151, Oh, what about the location code?
Sorry?
The new location code you use only in the trade.
You
can't still be an inch from Radio 3.
No.
Well?
Just down from Radio 1, actually. You're listening to LBC, 261 medium wave and 97.3 VHF, where news comes first.
LBC was beginning to find its feet. The on-air sound was improving, but advertising response was still poor. At Easter, major cuts in staffing had to be made for financial reasons, and instead of operating 24 hours a day, LBC now only broadcast from 5 a.m. to 1 a.m. But despite these cuts, LBC was still able to play a major role in the broadcasting of Parliament. MPs had originally been opposed to broadcasting of any sort from the House, but eventually, after much debate, an experimental period was undertaken.
Monday, June the 9th, 1975, a date in the history books.
Order!
And
Order!
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Petty?
calling Mr. Patty, the first question.
Mr. Speaker, we intend to do our utmost to see that the shipbuilding and aircraft industries bill is made law in the present session. As I explained to the House on the 17th of March, it would not be appropriate to estimate the costs at this stage because of the large number of unquoted securities to be acquired. Mr. Petty?
Would the Secretary of State not agree that, although he has, as usual, neglected to answer the question as far as the cost are concerned?
The short-term experiment was eventually to lead to regular broadcasting in early 1978. Meanwhile, LBC's confidence as a major source of news was growing. In December 1975, a group of terrorist gunmen broke into a flat in Balcombe Street near Marylebone Station and held hostage the elderly couple who lived there. When the end of the siege came, as was hoped, peacefully, LBC just happened to be carrying a live report from the scene. Keith Belcher takes up the story.
John Snow, who of course is now with ITN. John was covering the end of the Balcombe Street siege. He happened to be the reporter on duty, coming from our radio car, and he was personally convinced the siege was going to be over, and nobody else was. And we were the only station, actually in the world, to cover the end of the Balcombe Street siege live.
It's over. The 4 gunmen have come out. The siege here has just ended 1 minute ago. There is still a great deal of activity here, but a flashing blue-lighted van has just swept off into the distance with its siren wailing. Briefly, a figure came out onto the balcony, looked over, went back in again. Another came out, looked over, went back in again, and then suddenly we saw the 4 being led across the street into the van, into the police van, and away they've been swept. There is still very heavy armed cover here all round. I'm just getting further information. Just one moment. A gunman with a white handkerchief has literally just come. Really, it is so dark up that end now. We obviously are going to have to wait for the firm confirmation of the police, but the evidence so far is that we are right at the very end of this siege.
A memorable moment for reporter John Snow. LBC, 10 years on, continues after the news.
10 years ago this month, London's first independent radio station, LBC, came into being. Up until then, Londoners had to struggle by without its 24-hour-a-day coverage of news and events we all enjoy today. 30 years ago, the Multiple Sclerosis Society was formed to help sufferers of MS. Up until then, there was no organization to help and inform its many victims. Everyone at the Multiple Sclerosis Society would like to wish LBC a very happy 10th birthday, and hope their next 10 years are as successful as their first.
West Kent, it's where the Datsun deals are.
The West Kent Group would like to wish LBC a very happy 10th birthday. Remember, for a great deal on a Datsun, call West Kent on Biggin Hill 71077 for your nearest West Kent dealer.
It's where the Datsun deals are. West Kent Datsun.
West Kent, Biggin Hill 71077. Happy 10th birthday, LBC.
From LEB to LBC, congratulations on your first 10 years. Together we serve London, 24 hours a day, week after week, month after month, year after year. So here's to the next 10 years, and let's hope it's all good news for LBC from us at LEB.
The news at 9:30. Agreement has been reached between the two sides in the dispute which has brought the Ford car plant at Halewood on Merseyside to a standstill. Unions and management from the car delivery firm
LBC. LBC, 10 years on. Hello again from Bob Holness. In January 1976 came another major program change.
Hello, I'm Brian Hayes, and I'm coming to LBC. Starting Monday, January the 5th, you can hear the newsmakers and talk to the newsmakers every day from 10 till 1. Listen, you might have something to say. Up until the time I came to LBC, the phone-in program in the morning had been presented by an admirable and respected Fleet Street journalist. That, however, is not the way I saw broadcasting. I saw broadcasting being presented by broadcasting people, and the company obviously saw it the same way. Now, if you're going to look at the structure of a program, it is not as simple as sitting there saying, phone me and we'll talk about anything. It does not work like that. It's not, as far as I know, worked like that anywhere else. I didn't really see any reason why it should here. You've actually got to lead. You're not there as a sponge. You've got to lead, and therefore you construct a program which you think is an interesting program. It was 3 hours then. It is now 2. And we decided that what we would do is, very roughly speaking, divided into 3 parts. One part was very similar to what it had been. The other 2 parts had guests. One was supposed to be an individual who, when I said his/her name, then you would know who we were talking about. And the third guest would be somebody who was there because they knew about a subject. So you had 3 parts: phone in, a personality, maybe a politician, but certainly a personality, and a subject. And that was the basic structure when we started.
The man who gets maximum reaction on air, Brian Hayes. Well, as well as providing a news and information radio service for London, LBC also supplies news material to the other independent local radio stations through its subsidiary, Independent Radio News. By 1976, the total number of stations had reached 19. The role of IRN was increasing, and it too was working hard to gain an image of respectability and credibility. Responsible for this was Ron Onions, who had been head of news with Capital Radio.
There I was, quite enjoying myself for the first 6 months, snapping my fingers and grooving away to hot chocolate or whatever it was. And then the situation here at LBC was not good, and moves were made. And it was indicated to me that an approach would be made to me to come to this station. No, I said, not that. But sure enough, it happened, and not easily I decided to join here. I mean, straightening out some of the early problems, which seemed horrendous at the time, I think there's a kind of folklore around the place about reading the news, the IRN news, whoever the newsreader was, and the door opening and in coming the cleaner with a vacuum cleaner.
A hunt is on for those responsible for a terror bombing in London, which has killed 1 man and injured 20 other people, 2 of them children.
We had to learn not merely the disciplines of broadcasting and radio news, but doing that 24 hours a day in a format which was entirely new to Britain, and that's where growing up was traumatic. And all of those early problems one wouldn't want to go through again. One can look back and reminisce about them, and now laugh about them in some instances, but it was tough going.
Sports coverage, too, has always been an important part of LBC. Steve Tongue was one of the original sports team.
My first memories were, I think, of a match at Chelsea, at a stage when the new famous Chelsea stand was just being built, and therefore they were pulling down the old stand, so they'd moved the press box to a place just about as far away from the playing pitch as you could possibly get without actually being in Fulham. And vague memories of a team in yellow shirts scuttling up to one end and Chelsea in their blue shirts occasionally coming just a little bit nearer to us and trying to work out who'd scored the goals. And that occasion, Chelsea were in the First Division. It was that long ago. But we've moved on a little since then. Technically, we now have studio quality lines into the various games, and of course we travel far and wide, some of us, to attend some of the major matches. My first trip abroad was in 1975, when we weren't very experienced at these things. England went to Czechoslovakia and played in a match which was in fact abandoned after 7 minutes because it was so foggy you couldn't even see the near touchline, let alone the far touchline. Unfortunately, because we'd chosen to travel with some of the supporters to get some views and features with supporters about why they went this far to watch England play football, no extra overnight accommodation or anything had been arranged. So instead of coming straight back as we were going to, with the match being replayed the next day, we had to spend half the night on the airport floor. Also, because we were a little new to the whole thing, I actually had no ticket for the match and no telephone. And on both occasions had to wait until the gun-toting security guards had turned their back before climbing into the press box. So my first experience of covering football abroad for LBC was interesting, to say the least. It's remained interesting, but in many ways it's just a little easier these days.
The early tribulations of Steve Tongue. LBC sports coverage has certainly improved since those early days. Sports Watch on Saturday afternoons has been a mainstay of LBC programming since 1973. And the sports team have covered a wide variety of major international events, such as the World Cups and the Olympics. By 1978, LBC's image was improving, and so was its audience and advertising. All-night broadcasting resumed with Night Extra, a mixture of news and features rather than the old phone-ins. In 1980, the experience gained during the Balcombe Street siege came in useful when Iranian protesters took over their country's embassy in Kensington. As the siege was brought to an end by the SAS, LBC listeners were treated to a dramatic account by Malcolm Brabant.
Quick! Come to me! There have just been 3 explosions which have ripped through the embassy building. Smoke is wafting over the roofs now, and there are gunmen, and there are policemen on the balcony, just over the doorway. They appear to be going in. That came just a short while, and there's gunfire going. I just heard one shot.
The wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer in 1981 gave LBC and Independent Radio the chance to cover the occasion with their largest outside broadcast ever, with commentators along the procession's route and also inside St. Paul's Cathedral. I had the good fortune to be sharing that commentary box above the great west door with Katie Boyle, who, being Katie, had come, prepared for a long stint, with a small hamper of smoked salmon sandwiches for us both, and 2 bottles of mineral water. The day, with all its regal splendour, was one which I shall never forget, as the procession of the bride is about to move in through the west door. She herself is looking very composed, I think, Katie.
And I'm so glad they never swept back that fringe. There was a rumour that they were going to sweep it back, and they haven't. The bridegroom is now flanked by the 2 supporters, his 2 supporters, his 2 brothers.
And as that beautiful music sounds, and indeed it is a musical wedding, as has been said all along, the procession of the bride.
Take thee, Charles Philip Arthur George.
Take thee, Philip Charles Arthur George.
To my wedded husband.
To my wedded husband.
So the crowds who travel from every corner of the land and from all over the world can now see the Prince and Princess of Wales. And the cheers tell their own story as they step down the steps now of St. Paul's. The crowd really now enjoying it, enjoying the spectacle. They've been patiently waiting. They heard the service, actually, and during the service, because it was relayed outside St. Paul's by loudspeaker, the cheers rang out literally during the ceremony when the Archbishop of Canterbury pronounced the couple man and wife.
And whilst the royal wedding coverage was certainly a great occasion, a year later, LBC was faced with its toughest test yet.
LBC keeps you informed on the Falklands crisis. The big developments as soon as they happen.
And I've just been handed more on the Falklands. The Ministry of Defence...
A Royal Navy ship fired shells during the night at a surface vessel close to the Falklands.
And thoughtful analysis as the options change.
This is a situation the government cannot accept. David Spanier at the Foreign Office.
Aircraft fire in a later British attack on the airstrip at Port Stanley. Phil Longman, IRN, Buenos Aires.
The only thing they ought to do is to get off that island.
The Sea Wolf can hit a 4.5-inch shell in flight. Paul Maurice, IRN, at the Ministry of Defence.
Now everyone is wondering just what happens next. Tim Sabido, IRN, aboard the Canberra in the South Atlantic.
It's not just the future of the Falklands at stake, but the future of Mrs. Thatcher as well. Peter Allen, IRN, Westminster.
LBC on the Falklands crisis. Informed, fast.
As the Red Dragon of Wales fluttered at half-mast above us, the most moving moment of this 30-minute ceremony, the playing of the last post. The notes drifting like the smoke from Sir Galahad across the water to be lost in the wind. They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. We will remember them.
Staff, resources and facilities were to be pushed to the limit in covering the conflict. The end result, however, was to show that nowadays, in times of crisis, people do not tune automatically to the BBC for news coverage. But although LBC is mainly about news, we've also tried to take an interest in our listeners and their problems. During the week, Nightline has a regular series of advice on personal, legal and consumer matters, and this showed the need for more specialist help, which was given during a series of special weeks on stress, alcohol and drug abuse. It proved to be very popular and very helpful. Responsible for organising these was former assistant editor Keith Belcher.
We carried out these things hoping that a few people in London might listen in to some advice spots and some information and then be helped by an off-air referral service that we organised. We thought there would just be a few people interested in it. In fact, more than 5,000 people phoned in, and we were able to refer them to agencies who could help them. I like to think that even if only half of those were actually helped by the LBC service there, then that's 2,500 people in London with a drugs or stress problem who have actually been physically helped by LBC. I think that's a terrific achievement.
LBC has also tried, we hope successfully, to broaden its appeal. There are now programmes for young Londoners and the Asian and black communities. Rice and Peas on Sunday evenings is a mixture of news, features and music for London's black community, presented in his own special style by Sid Burke.
Wagwan! How you doing? Check the run-ins. All right? Right. What with all the rain, the cricket season must be here. Still, less said about that the better. In the programme tonight, Sugar, a seminar during the week.
But there's no denying that LBC has had its critics. There are those who say that we don't give enough coverage to local London news, nor cater enough for all interests. LBC's performance was re-examined last year when the IBA had to re-advertise the London News and Information contract as part of its obligations. Several public meetings were held, where questions and comments about the LBC service could be made. In the end, the IBA was confident that LBC was able to continue to provide the required standard of service, and the franchise was re-awarded.
It's over 3 years since Cathay Pacific first advertised on LBC. Since then, we've grown up together to the advantage of radio station, airline and passengers alike. That was 1,200 commercials ago, almost 10 hours of airtime, approximately 18,000 times as long as it takes to say, Happy birthday from Cathay Pacific.
Let's hear it for that big band of men from North Thames Gas.
I am the man.
He's the man from the gas.
In the band.
In the man from the gas.
And to help you with your gas central heating boiler,
the man's got a service plan.
Get a 2-star plus service plan and your gas boiler gets an annual maintenance check with free parts and labour.
And if the boiler breaks down, is the free priority call out?
Yes, ma'am. 'Cause I'm your man from the gas.
He's a winner.
With a plan from the gas.
It's a thriller.
In the blue and white band.
At your North Thames Gas showroom, a good deal comes with experience.
So get the man from North Thames Gas.
Hello, I'm John Allen, Director of Marketing, North Thames Gas. Our objective is to provide a high-quality product and first-class service. LBC is an important medium for telling London that our experience means a good deal. We value our relationship with LBC over the past 10 years. We wish them every success for the next 10.
LBC's operation is a highly technical one, and much of the credit for ensuring that things run as smoothly as possible must lie with the station's team of engineers, who are responsible for the operation and maintenance of LBC's equipment. Roger Francis is head of engineering.
One of the particular problems we have on the engineering side in trying to keep operational a station such as LBC and Independent Radio News running is that effectively it's 2 radio stations running side by side and running on a continual 24-hour basis. This inevitably places a fairly heavy demand upon the usage of equipment and subsequently its availability for maintenance purposes in the event of breakdown. Similarly, the operational staff are required also to be here 24 hours a day, not only for our own in-house operations and on-air programming and studio recording facilities, but also to be available for the network stations in the event of any problems with the IRN service on the technical side. We've recently completed 2 new mobile OB vehicles to increase our coverage around London, and this continuous process of updating the technical facilities with new technology will probably continue much into our new franchise period.
So, as we celebrate the first 10 years of LBC, how much have things changed since day one? One person who's noticed a difference is Adrian Love, one of the early presenters and now back with the station.
I think LBC is now part of London. When LBC started, I always got the impression that there was no idea that we were actually in the entertainment industry as well as in the information industry. I think LBC has now learnt not only to be informative and credible, but also entertaining. And that was the early days were a problem. I think LBC has become an important factor in communication in London, but it's part of London. And I think that Londoners have now taken us as part of their lifestyle, whereas before, in the early days, we were telling them what to think. We are now telling them what we think and inviting them to tell us what they think. And I think that's why it's getting better all the time.
Well, LBC has, first of all, proved that a 24-hour news service can actually exist. A lot of people in the beginning said, oh, it's just a lot of waffle and won't be necessary. But LBC has gone on 24 hours a day, almost entirely speech all the time, an interesting speech at that, and has picked up a very loyal audience in London. I mean, 1.5 million people, a growing audience, who stay tuned to LBC and stay tuned night and day. So it's achieved an amazing amount of things in its 10 years.
It's become much more assured, much more competent, totally professional. The quality of the presenters is tremendous, in my view, now, right across the day. Just 100%, 200% better all the way around.
Ron Onions, before that, Keith Belcher. Wallace Gravatt, as we've heard already, was a listener on that very first morning, and he's remained loyal through the decade. Does he think things have changed?
Overall, of course, I think the whole setup has improved tremendously. I mean, the structure of the programs. I mean, when they went on all night with Nightline, it was fun, but, you had to wait for the people to come on, and it took ages, perhaps, and then they were a bit boring and so on. And I'm very sorry, though, when they weren't doing any programs at night at all. And I think it was a very important development when Night Extra started. And because, again, for people who are on night shift or can't sleep or whatever, you can sort of dip in and you can enjoy a story or an item of interest to you and not always sure what's coming next. And I think this is part of the fun of it. But the whole thing is structured much more carefully. Even the phone-ins, I mean, having guests for particular hours and then only allowing perhaps 1 hour for general calls, I think that's a big improvement on early days when sort of everybody phoned in and any time, more or less, and talked about anything for far too long. So I think it's far more informative and has a greater interest to all ages and all groups now than it probably did in the early days.
Advertising, the lifeblood of the station, has certainly changed. Dave Mason has been responsible for the scheduling of commercials from the beginning.
Way back in 73 when we started, the majority of commercials were taken just straight off TV soundtracks. Indeed, some advertisers even supplied copy to a radio station on 35mm film and seemed quite upset that we couldn't transmit. So yes, it has changed dramatically. People now accept radio as an advertising medium and they are making commercials specifically for radio. Humour has come in a lot. People like Volvo, Philips, household names, very funny commercials. Commercial lengths have changed dramatically as well. We used to sell a lot of 37 ads, we still do, but units of 40, 50 and 60 are becoming more common because the spoken word needs more time to get across than a picture on television.
As they're all too ready to recount, over the past 10 years, LBC staff have been involved in some very amusing incidents.
I remember one in particular when the news was being read, and I was convinced, this was when the newsreader actually operated all the equipment himself, I was convinced he was doing it wrong. So I rushed into the studio to help him by pressing the start button on the tape machine when he was playing in a taped insert. And I rushed in and pressed the wrong button, and I pressed the record button. Now, what that meant was that right across London, in Lord knows how many homes, this amazing noise came roaring out of their radios, and I never lived that down.
I was doing an interview with the author of a book who it had made it clear to me before we started that he wasn't feeling too well and, been plied with cups of water and things, and he said that he was willing to actually go through the interview, but he wasn't at all well, and he looked very sickly, and it clearly was very off colour. But anyway, we started the interview and everything went very smoothly for the first 4 minutes or so. And I was in the middle of lobbing another question to him. And suddenly he waved his arms and looked almost desperately at me, and then leapt up from his chair and vaulted towards the door, you see. This was while the red light was on and the tape was whirring round and the microphones were on. So the last I saw of him was disappearing out of the door at rapid speed. And the poor man obviously was making a dive for the nearest loo, which sadly wasn't near enough. And of course, when I came back down the stairs through the newsroom, people kept coming up to me saying, God, you must have given him a really hard time. You know, what kind of a grilling did you give that poor victim, as he was last seen running out of the studio and throwing up all over the newsroom?
Therese Birch with an unfortunate and very unpleasant experience, well from the past to the future. Peter Thornton is editorial director. How does he see LBC's role over the next 10 years?
It's a very interesting time in broadcasting of any kind, because there are certainly more and more places that people can go for in-home entertainment. And LBC has to take its place in that kind of spectrum of media. And I think that it's important that we listen carefully to what our audience, what the people of London say they want from this radio station. It's one of London's services. It's like the buses, it's like the airport. It's part of the servicing of the city. And we periodically conduct quite elaborate surveys to find out what it is the audience wants to hear, what they feel they need. And as London changes, as the world changes, we have to be prepared to change with them. But I think it's important that we don't lose the crucial role that we have, the main service role, that we actually provide them with news and information that they need to go about their daily business.
An optimistic view, and one held too by Christopher Chataway, the minister responsible for setting up independent radio in the early 1970s, and now chairman of LBC IRN.
I think that, there are bound to be difficult periods. I mean, I'm optimistic for ILR in the longer term. Admittedly, there's going to be cable, there's video, there's satellites. The number of alternatives for people in the home as to what they're going to listen to and watch is going on, is multiplying.
Not a competition.
Not a competition. But commercial radio is still young in this country. It still only gets, a couple of % or something of advertising revenue. That is among the smallest in the Western world. I don't believe that radio is actually going to be hit by the proliferation of visual alternatives, because radio, I think people will always want when they're doing something else. I find it an enormously exciting station to be involved with. It'll never be easy, but I do think we've got some great opportunities.
And now, 10 years on, LBC is one of 42 independent local radio stations around the country. It would be impossible to thank individually the hundreds of people who've worked for LBC, the thousands who've contributed to the programs, and of course, the millions of listeners, without whom we wouldn't be here at all. My name's Bob Holness. LBC 10 Years On was written and compiled by Charlie Rose and Paul Easton.
There are more than 300 advertising agencies in London. Many have used LBC over the past 10 years. Some are big, some are very big. But we at Mentor Advertising, well, we're the biggest advertising agency you've never heard of. You see, we just happen to think that our clients are more important than we are. Clients like the Royal Opera House, the National Theatre, the Barbican Centre, and Wembley Stadium on one hand, and George Benson, 10cc, Ultravox, and the Harlem Globetrotters on the other. We work for some of the finest names in the entertainment world, like the English National Opera, the Old Vic, Sadler's Wells, and the London Dungeon. Yes, they're all Mentor clients. So when you hear a highly entertaining commercial on LBC, it's on the cards that Mentor had a hand in it. LBC have played no small part in helping us to put, if you'll pardon the expression, bottoms on seats in some of London's most famous venues. So why are we the largest advertising agency you've never heard of? Well, when you employ Mentor, it's your name that counts, not ours.
This is your extremely early, or late, depending on which way you look at it, early morning call from Harrods. Either way, we thought we couldn't pass up the opportunity to wish a happy birthday to LBC. After all, it's not often you meet such an articulate and well-informed 10-year-old, or one that stays up all night. Congratulations, LBC. That was your extremely early, or late, early morning call from Harrods.
It's 10 o'clock. This is Steve Allen. Miss Sarah Keyes, the woman expecting the child of Tory Minister Cecil Parkinson, has issued a statement saying she wants to be allowed to live a normal life. It's her first comment since the scandal broke on Wednesday. Miss Keyes, Mr. Parkinson's former secretary, who's due to give birth in January, didn't speak directly to newsmen.